As soon as students hear the name Shakespeare, they cringe. Many imagine painful hours of deciphering Old English text that makes no sense to them. The first thing I want to dispel is that Shakespeare is not Old English. In fact, it falls at the beginning of the modern English era. The second item I would like to dispel is that Shakespeare is too hard to understand. With a few tips, you should be able to read through any of the Bard's plays on your own and understand what you're reading. All of Shakespeare's plays and poetry were actually written to be said aloud, and it is sometimes difficult for readers to understand what he's trying to say. We are going to go over 6 tips that may make a difference between hating Shakespeare and appreciating how relevant, exciting, and funny his plays really are. Tip 1. One reason Shakespeare's plays can seem so daunting is due to the unfamiliar words. Languages do not just happen. They are a result of hundreds and even thousands of years of development. The English language is in a constant state of change. Every year, hundreds of words enter our language, and many more are dropped from our language. The English language itself contains around 300,000 active words. Your vocabulary is probably around 3,000 words, but you actually get by on a daily basis only using 150 of those words. By contrast, William Shakespeare had a vocabulary of about 15,000 words, and Shakespeare actually invented many of those words in order to make them fit in his plays. For example, one of the words he came up with was alligator. A second word he came up with was the noun elbow. He also came up with the word to dawn, and finally, the noun eyeball was also coined by Shakespeare. A question you may ask is, do the words stay around forever? No. You certainly do not use the same slang expressions your parents or grandparents used. Likewise, the slang Shakespeare used is very different than the slang you use today. If you don't recognize a word, don't worry about it. It may not even exist in our language anymore. For example, the words sirrah, drollery, sowl, and forespent are no longer in common use, but they were very common slang terms when Shakespeare was writing. Tip 2. If you cannot figure out a word in the context of the play, you should really make use of the footnotes at the bottom of the page. If it's a word Shakespeare made up, the footnotes will provide an explanation. If it is a slang phrase of his time period or a word that's been dropped from the English language, the footnotes will also explain that fact too. Tip 3. If you're in doubt about how to read a line, one thing you can remember is that the greatest stress of a line usually comes at the end of a sentence. An example of this is in a quote from Romeo and Juliet. Most people mistakenly read the quote as, "Wherefore art thou, Romeo?" when you should actually read, "Wherefore art thou, Romeo?" If you emphasize the where, you are asking the location of Romeo, but Juliet is actually emphasizing his name. She wants to know why he is Romeo, part of her family's enemies. The meaning changes based on the emphasis of the correct word. Tip 4. Students often mistakenly read plays and stop at the end of a line as if it's the end of a sentence. The end of a line is not the end of a sentence. You need to pay close attention to punctuation. When a line ends with a period, stop. If it ends with a comma, pause, but do not stop. If the line does not end with punctuation, you need to just keep on reading without stopping or pausing. When I listen to students read to me in class, this is how I often hear them read. Thus in plain terms, your father hath consented, that you shall be my wife, your dowry agreed on. And will you, nill you, I will marry you. Now, Kate, I am a husband for your turn. For by this light, whereby I see thy beauty that doth make me like thee well, thou must be married to no man but me. For I am he, born to tame you, Kate, and bring you from a wild Kate to a Kate, conformable as other household Kates. Most students read as if the end of a line is the end of a sentence. If you follow the punctuation, it will actually sound different. For example, thus in plain terms, your father hath consented that you shall be my wife, your dowry agreed on, and will you, nill you, I will marry you. Now, Kate, I am a husband for your turn. For by this light, whereby I see thy beauty that doth make me like thee well, thou must be married to no man but me. For I am born to tame you, Kate, and bring you from a wild Kate to a Kate conformable as other household Kates. You need to read it as if it were a paragraph, following the punctuation, stopping only when you reach punctuation. Tip 5. Shakespeare often left out letters, syllables, and whole words. These omissions aren't really that much different from the way we speak today. We may say, "What's up with that?" The real sentence is, "What is up with that?" We speed up our words and don't always pronounce the whole word or every syllable. We do this because sometimes we're talking kind of fast and we leave parts of words out. Shakespeare did the same thing in his text. He made his words reflect the way people would be speaking them aloud. If you see in a sentence an apostrophe, you need to try and figure out which letter or letters the apostrophe is replacing. For example, in the word tis, the apostrophe is replacing the I in it. In the word e'en, the apostrophe is replacing the V in even. And in the word ne'er, the apostrophe is replacing the V in never. Remember, whenever you see an apostrophe, try and figure out which letter or letters that apostrophe is replacing to speed up the speech. Tip 6. Have you ever watched the character Yoda in the Star Wars series? It always sounds like he's talking in riddles to me. However, if you just switch the order of the words in Yoda's sentences around, you can usually figure out exactly what he's saying. For example, in the sentence, "With you strong is the force." If you switch a couple of parts of the sentence around, it will actually make sense to you. The force is strong with you. It is very similar with Shakespeare. Many of his sentences have the words switched around in unusual order. If you look at the sentence and try and figure out if you move a couple of words around, it may make sense to you. Did Shakespeare really talk like this? Probably not. But there are many reasons why he did write his text this way. For example, to create a specific poetic rhythm, such as iambic pentameter, to emphasize certain words, like the last one in a sentence, or to give a character a specific speech pattern. Remember, if the sentence doesn't make sense to you, try and switch some of the words around. Just switching the end to the beginning may help the sentence make more sense to you. I hope some of these tips make it easier for you to read Shakespeare's text and actually enjoy his works.